They say it had the most incredible architecture, a massive army and navy, and perhaps the most advanced society in the ancient world. And they say it vanished in a single day and a single night. An extraordinary civilization, lost forever. Will these men change the course of modern archaeology? Will they lead us to the greatest lost city of antiquity?
Escúchame, no importa que tiene la estructura es humano.
The city may not necessarily be under the bottom of the sea, but rather under the bottom of this plasma.
Atlantis should be somewhere around here, but where? And if it is here, how come we can't see it?
This is the ultimate quest, finding Atlantis. What if it's true? What if the most extraordinary tale ever told is true?
This city of Atlantis is seen by many as the mother of Egypt and Mesopotamia and Israel and Europe and all the other civilizations that began in this area. And if it began here, we may be looking at the single most important site for humanity.
The discovery of Atlantis would change history. Myth would become reality, and we could see for the first time the mother of all civilizations. And so, this mysterious sunken city of antiquity is the stuff of obsession. Generation after generation has set out to find her, and each successive quest has ended in failure. But now, the impossible may be in our grasp.
You see this lack of vegetation, though, we can only
A team of
speculate.
scientists are employing satellite photography, ground-penetrating radar, underwater archaeology, and historical sleuthing in an effort to find a sunken city. But where do they start? The search for Atlantis begins with a fundamental question. What was Atlantis? What do we really know about it? Today, the story of the ancient city has been transformed by pop culture into a vague fantasy. To distill any truth from the myth, we must go back to the original source. For Angela Hobbs, the search begins with a philosopher.
All we know about Atlantis comes from a few pages of the book that I'm holding in my hands, written by the Greek philosopher Plato. He is the gold standard. There is no other ancient source for the myth of Atlantis. This is it. The records speak of a vast power that sprang forth from beyond, from the Atlantic Ocean. For at that time, this ocean was passable, since it had an island in it in front of the strait that you people say you call the Pillars of Heracles.
Plato's descriptions of Atlantis are incredibly detailed, and his writings provide any Atlantis seeker a proper checklist for the search, beginning with the location of the lost city. According to Plato, Atlantis was an island kingdom with land rings and circular harbors, situated just beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Many believe that the Pillars of Hercules describe the peaks that flank the entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar, the northern pillar being the Rock of Gibraltar, and the southern pillar a corresponding peak in North Africa. Accordingly, Dr. Richard Freund believes that the best location for Atlantis is in southern Spain.
The Pillars of Hercules was known by every single ancient writer as being located in what we call today the Straits of Gibraltar. This bay is located just beyond those ancient Pillars of Hercules.
Freund's focus is on the Guadalquivir River Delta in a national park called Doñana. Here, he believes a massive ancient bay existed in antiquity.
Here we are in the largest marsh in southern Spain, hundreds of square miles. It is massive. We're talking about 40, 50 miles worth of just marsh. And archaeologists think that buried in this marsh is the lost city of Atlantis.
In 1922, archaeologists George Bonser and Adolf Schulten proposed that Atlantis was hidden under these mudflats. For years, most scholars ignored this theory. But in 2004, a young German physicist named Rainer Kuhn made headlines by using satellite photography to resurrect the Bonser-Schulten theory.
I am here within the mudflats of the Donana National Park. It is exactly here where I think that Plato's Atlantis was located.
Dr. Kuhn observed strange circular patterns in a satellite photograph of the Donana mudflats. Matching the photograph to the detailed descriptions in Plato, Kuhn became convinced that the lost city was here, in southern Spain. In his writings, Plato described a port city with 3 rings of concentric harbors, giving exact dimensions for each. Kuhn believes that the circular patterns he's identified match Plato's measurements. And there's more. Plato described in detail 2 temples on the center island of Atlantis, one dedicated to the god Poseidon. And inside the circular patterns on the Donana mudflats, Kuhn identified rectangular anomalies. He calculated the dimensions of this rectangle and came up with a perfect match to Plato's description of Poseidon's temple. Kuhn's theory has precipitated an archaeological expedition to determine whether the anomalies detected from space do indeed point to man-made structures under the mud. The Spanish team includes anthropologist Juan Villarreal, whose research is being closely followed by Professor Richard Freund and Paul Bowman, a specialist in subsoil sonar mapping.
Those shapes certainly do not correlate with any possible geological feature. In my mind, there's no question they're man-made features.
One of the big circles is connected with several rectangular structures. We think that those rectangular structures have a wall below the shape in the soil. And we are trying to find if we have a building.
If there is a building or any other artifact deep beneath this mud, Freund is convinced it could point to something extraordinary.
If they can excavate and come up with just a few really good artifacts that can be dated to 4,000 years ago, then we have evidence for one of the great myths in civilization, the myth of the beginnings of Atlantis.
But there are skeptics, even within this archaeological team, that say Atlantis is nothing but a myth. Freund says they need only look 1,800 kilometers east to a place the Turkish call Troya. We know it as Troy. It's one of the most storied cities of the ancient world and proof that myth can become reality.
So, this is the main street of the late Bronze Age citadel of Troya, dated around the 13th century BC.
For years, people thought that the city of Troy was a fantasy, a made-up place described in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. In the 3,000-year-old story, Troy is the location for the Trojan War, the legendary Trojan horse, the warrior Achilles, and the beautiful daughter of Zeus, Helen of Troy. Like Atlantis, Troy was long thought to be a myth. Those who searched for it were ridiculed.
There were many voices that would say that this story is pure fiction, that Troy does not exist.
And then, in 1870, amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann turned myth into history. He proved that Troy was real. Schliemann took one of the oldest myths in Western literature, read it as fact, and unearthed the fabled city.
He used the Iliad as a tour guide. He accepted it as a direct description.
Homer described a city with steep rising walls and broad streets. Schliemann found them. The ruins here show a city of formidable architecture. Schliemann needed to locate the city beside 2 rivers.
Troy is described as a city located at the conflow of two rivers, Scamandros and Simois, which are here.
He had to find evidence of the Trojan War, and indeed the archaeology here could point to a bloody battle.
This building was roofed with wooden beams, and we know that it ended in a fire because the beams were charred. And if there was a Trojan War, this is the best evidence that we have.
Homer also described a protective moat surrounding the city of Troy.
Here we are in the premises of the lower city of Troia. The feature that we are excavating here is a ditch or a moat, and it is 4 meters wide and 2 meters deep, and we think that it is a defensive system.
For Atlantis hunters, Troy serves as an inspiration, proving that myth and fact are sometimes one and the same.
When Schliemann came here, he was successful. He excavated an archaeological site that everybody agrees nowadays is the site of Troia. He wanted to solve an archaeological problem, and he did.
Will this team of archaeologists searching the vast mudflats in southern Spain be as fortunate? This rich and strange marshland on the Spanish coast is part of a protected park called Doñana. Geologists explain that in ancient times, this area of southern Spain was underwater. The Doñana Park was essentially a large bay.
In the bay, they were created over a long period of time massive sandbars that allowed people to use these sandbars to create cities.
Dr. Richard Freund believes that the rings of Atlantis may have existed in this bay thousands of years ago. The Greek philosopher Plato explicitly wrote that Atlantis was situated facing Gadirian country. Gadir was the ancient name for the modern city of Cadiz, and that fits perfectly with the geography here. If Atlantis was located in this ancient bay, it would have been facing ancient Gadir, which means that the remains of Atlantean civilization would now be below the Doñana mud. Freund and a team of archaeologists, geologists, and anthropologists now focus on satellite photos of the area.
We have put different depths.
They believe they can see what may be circular shadows of an ancient city.
Finally, we've narrowed it down to a very specific location around this mysterious circle in the midst of the swamp.
Discover the past with exclusive ancient history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything from the wonders of Pompeii to the rebellion of Boudica and the mysteries of prehistoric Scotland. Immerse yourself in the captivating stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
But in order to pick the best sections to investigate, the team needs better images. It seems a low-tech strategy when compared to satellite photography, but by attaching cameras to balloon and kite, the team can acquire much higher resolution images than the photographs taken from space.
Yeah, there we go, so that's working.
The aerial photographs we're doing today can give us the clearest images that they've ever had. Today we'll get the best photographs of this entire area with this balloon and see whether those rings really exist.
We're going to lift the balloon to at least 100 meters, and then we'll probably work at different increments of elevation, 100, 150, 200, and so forth.
Any patterns or anomalies in the soil that show up in these new photographs may point to subsurface man-made structures. But if there was once a mighty city here, what happened to it? The cataclysmic final chapter in Plato's story is one that Atlantis hunters must follow closely. Plato describes violent earthquakes and floods, and after a day and night, he says the entire island of Atlantis sank below the sea. Is there any evidence in southern Spain of such an ancient cataclysm?
Es obvio que nos encontramos en una plataforma sobre la que se han movido estas grandes piedras, estos grandes bloques que pesan varias toneladas y que evidentemente no han podido ser movidos por el hombre.
Dr. Juan Antonio Morales has gathered geological evidence pointing to a long history of massive tsunamis hitting this coastline.
Puede observarse en esta zona como el desplazamiento de algunas de estas rocas a lo largo de esta plataforma tiene decenas, incluso centenas de metros. Por lo tanto, esto sugiere el desplazamiento no a causa de un solo tsunami, sino a causa de tsunamis sucesivos.
If the rings of Atlantis existed in this ancient bay and were ravaged by successive tsunamis, the city would have been torn apart or perhaps pulled into the sea. As a result, evidence for the lost civilization may not just be under the Doñana mudflats. It may be underwater, further out, off the modern coast. And that's exactly where the scientists now take their search. Marine archaeologist Claudio Lozano and geologist Juan Antonio Morales are employing the latest in side-scan sonar technology. The torpedo-shaped towfish has two transducers mounted on its tail. Sound waves are generated and bounced off the seabed. The signals are received by the computer on deck, which converts them into images. Any strange anomaly that appears on the sonar imaging is mapped, and the coordinates are recorded.
In this case, it's irregular. Probably it's a rock, but sometimes when this anomaly is completely geometric, a square or it's a rectangular, we have to check it.
It will take 3 days to map 8 sonar lines, 10 kilometers long and as far as 6 kilometers out from shore. On day 2, the towfish picks something up.
We have seen an anomaly, which is a vertical wall. This is very different to a geological formation.
Magnifico.
It is a vertical structure.
Right now we found an anomaly that is not geological at all. It's very big, it's very high.
Two walls, 1, 2, completely vertical. It's very nice.
And the shape is not natural.
It's attractive.
Claudio and Juan Antonio have located what looks to be a large structure 12 meters below the surface. Now they must plan a dive. But there are scholars who would say the Spanish team is searching in entirely the wrong waters. Why? Because the search for Atlantis has obsessed many great minds over thousands of years, and that obsession has carried quests all over the globe. For many scholars and explorers, Plato's description of the city's sophisticated architecture and society points to the mysterious ruins on the islands of Greece. And underneath the clay soil on this hilltop in Crete is evidence of an ancient civilization far ahead of its time. Archaeologists call it Minoan.
Minoans were real master builders. I'm walking on a 4,000-year-old street, which was probably the main access to this Minoan settlement. Beautifully paved with very large slabs, specially cut for this building. All over the island you find elaborate architecture with major ceremonial halls, with frescoes, with shrines, and they really had a very sophisticated life.
Plato described Atlantis as having gorgeous temples and shrines with a highly ornamented palace situated on the center island. Does the Minoan architecture on this Greek island reflect the same?
We're in the palace at Knossos, the major site of Minoan civilization, with this massive palatial structure at its core.
Central to Dr. Carl Knappett's investigations on Crete is the mystifying Palace of Knossos.
This is a megastructure covering about 10,000 square meters. Now, this kind of architecture required incredible planning to get the stones from the quarry, to transport them here, to have the skilled masons work them, to create this kind of straight line and the different kinds of shapes would have been very, very difficult.
Is it possible that the Minoans are Plato's fabled Atlanteans? It is a mystery what these master builders and advanced people actually called themselves. It turns out, Minoan is a modern name from the 20th century.
We call the Bronze Age inhabitants of Crete the Minoans, but they would not have called themselves Minoans. This term comes from King Minos, the legendary mythical ruler of Crete. So from Minos we get Minoans.
So, when archaeologist Arthur Evans excavated here in the 1900s, he named this place the Palace of Minos, and he called the mysterious people who built it Minoans. But walking amongst these breathtaking remnants of the ancient world, it's easy to imagine the Minoans calling their city by another name, Atlantis. But to be an Atlantis contender, the city would have to include a complex acropolis with dwellings and halls. It's all here at Knossos. And according to Plato, the bull was a central part of Atlantean culture. He wrote that around the temples, sacred bulls roamed free, were worshipped by priests, and sacrificed in honor of Poseidon. And here in Knossos, it's obvious bulls were a powerful symbol.
I'm above the northern entrance passage at Knossos, and behind me is this imposing bull fresco. Now, it really seems as if the bull was a very significant part of Knossian political propaganda. There's a bull leaping scene found in fresco fragments over in the east part of the palace as well.
And in the ancient Minoan ruins of Sisi, Dr. Jan Driesen is constantly digging up artifacts related to bull worship.
This was just found. The bull was related to Poseidon, the sea god. The bull jumping was possibly related to male initiation. Bulls keep turning up sort of on a regular basis in Minoan settlements, in Minoan shrines. So definitely a special element for Minoan society.
The cultural importance of the bull, the stunning architecture, the depictions of a utopian lifestyle all coalesce into a familiar picture. It does seem possible that the people we call Minoans are really the long-lost Atlanteans. But how did this culture meet its end? What about the cataclysm? Plato says that Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night. Does the evidence here support a cataclysmic end?
It's from this kind of archaeological evidence that we can deduce some kind of a crisis situation. A lot of things went bad.
On the coast of southern Spain, researchers have discovered subsurface structures that may offer the perfect match to Plato's Atlantis.
It's not geologic at all.
But there are those who say the Spanish team is way off course, that they should be searching the Greek islands. The archaeology here is convincing. There is evidence in the Minoan ruins on Crete of something terrible. Could an ancient cataclysm have wiped out this advanced civilization just as described in the Atlantis story? Part of the answer may be found just 137 kilometers from Crete. This is the Greek island of Santorini, also known as Thera. What occurred here during Minoan times very nearly defies description.
It's a volcanic island, and the volcano exploded very, very spectacularly about 3,600 years ago. And we have here evidence with this very impressive architecture, not even excavated, it's just being exposed as it's eroded by the sea. And you can see here evidence of the Theran eruption with ash layers and pottery showing that this building was destroyed at exactly this time.
The huge ash cloud from Thera would have blocked out the sun for days on end. For the people on Crete, the effects were devastating.
We had these huge ash clouds arriving on the island of Crete, and they deposited sort of like thick packages of volcanic ash that must have caused tremendous problems in their agriculture, in their shipping, in their commerce. A lot of people probably lost their houses. You had volcanic winters. A lot of things went bad.
The earthquakes and massive volcanic activity on Santorini may have produced tsunamis, gigantic waves that crashed onto the north coast of Crete. The waves would have carried with them volcanic pumice, a very porous and solidified lava rock. Evidence of pumice on Crete would be proof positive of an ancient tsunami.
There's some spots along the north coast of the island where you found like pumice deposition. That is probably related to the Santorini eruption.
And there's been recent activity from archaeologists suggesting that those deposits could really only have been caused by something like a tsunami.
Their innovative architecture, advanced cities and temples, their art and culture could have all been wiped out by what was one of the most powerful eruptions in human history. The case linking the Minoans to Atlantis is strong, but the Atlantis legend involves its sinking and overnight disappearance. And for the Minoans, the eruption of Thera was not the end. They survived.
We have clear continuity in the Minoan civilization after the Theran eruption. We can see archaeological layers showing the occupation at the time of the eruption, and then rebuilding and reoccupation straight away afterwards.
It seems that, despite everything, this is not the place that Plato describes. The Minoan civilization did not sink into the sea. And although there are many reasons to place Atlantis here, there is evidence that goes against the theory. Does this shine new light on the mudflats back in Spain? Dr. Freund believes that this team is on the verge of uncovering a city that conforms to all the criteria outlined by Plato.
We're standing here at the outskirts of the Doña Ana National Park, the source of tremendous speculation that perhaps this was the place where Atlantis was located, and this was the place, the mud, the shoal into which it disappeared.
In Doñana Park, the team reviews the new aerial photographs they obtained by flying kite and balloon cameras over the mudflats.
Oh, this is interesting right here.
This picture right here at the higher altitude, you may see this rectangle that we were talking about.
If they can find circular and rectangular patterns, they believe they will have strong evidence pointing to the footprint of a lost city.
This particular feature was not included in our list, so this is new that Paul's photography has revealed to us.
And this area has been cleared by the grass cutters for thatch. And even after clearing, the feature was still visible from the kite photo. It's clearly not just a feature that's visible in vegetation, but visible in the earth.
Is this the Atlantis footprint that Plato described?
This is, I think, the most important feature in the aerial photography that's been done. It's the one that most resembles anything like Atlantis. It has an area that looks like a port leading into a large circle where the concentric circles would have been.
Freund is convinced that the photographs reveal a pattern that matches Plato's description, a series of circular harbors with a central canal connecting them to the ocean. And the team has identified more intriguing features.
Circular features, linear features, parallel features, all in the order of a human scale. So, for instance, things that look like pathways or roadways that are 1 meter to 2 meters across, features that look like buildings that are 4 to 8 meters across.
The team now employs electrical resistivity tomography, or ERT, to record images of what is deep below the circular patterns.
What we're doing here is we're running a bunch of current through the ground, and we're measuring what comes back from that, and we'll be able to get a picture of what's in the subsurface up to about 12 meters below the ground surface.
And if they do find archaeological remnants, the team could be close to solving 2 ancient mysteries, one Platonic and one biblical.
You're right, I didn't go very far.
The biblical mystery involves the lost city of Tarshish.
The rectangle here, the rectangle there.
Tarshish is a city mentioned many times in the Bible, and many scholars believe that Tarshish is simply another name for the ancient and famous city of Tartessos.
Most scholars agree that Tartessos was located in southern Spain and that Tarshish was located in southern Spain. Tartessos was Tarshish.
In the written sources, Tartessos and Tarshish were favored for their metals. It is documented that trade ships would embark on 3-year journeys from the Middle East to fill their holds. Surprisingly, Tartessos and Tarshish disappear from the historical and biblical records. It's as if the cities suddenly ceased to exist. Professor Freund believes that's because in ancient days, Tartessos and Tarshish went by another name, Atlantis.
We have 2 remarkably similar stories being told in antiquity. The story of Tarshish in the Bible and the story of Atlantis in Plato and Roman sources. In the story of Plato, Atlantis is a port city located on an island at the far end of the known world, where deep water ships would come, taking 3 years to arrive at the end of their journey. In the Bible, Tarshish was that city that may have been built on an island, a deep water port, at the end of the known world for the Bible, and it was a place that took 3 years, according to the Book of Chronicles, for them to arrive at the end of their journey.
Tartessos equals Tarshish equals Atlantis. It's an interesting theory. Each city is documented as a famous port that disappears from the records mysteriously. And the remarkable similarities don't end there. Each of the 3 cities was fabled to have extensive mineral wealth, with access to massive resources of gold, silver, or copper.
Plato certainly does talk about mines, which the Atlanteans have access to, and one of these mines being for this probably fantastical metal called orichalk, though some archaeologists think they know what it might be or what it might be like. All we know is that it glows like fire.
Scholars have translated orichalk as mountain copper. Today, just upriver from the Doñana mudflats, the hills shadowing the Rio Tinto are mined for gold, silver, and copper. And it doesn't take long to find evidence of 5,000 years of mining.
Estamos en la corta de Cerro Colorado, en la famosa mina de Río Tinto. La gente del periodo tartésico explotaba este tipo de yacimientos que abundaban en todo el área.
The proximity to the deposits of valuable ore makes an ancient city located in Doñana a strong candidate for Atlantis. It's just one more clue that points to the coast of southern Spain as the best location for the lost city. And that's exactly where Claudio and Juan Antonio have planned to dive.
The anomalies we have seen, and the structures are completely square. This is curious because these 4 are forming a line 2 meters high. For me, it's the most interesting zone in this area. My best option is to go there to dive.
Using side-scan sonar, the Spanish team has isolated 5 areas off the southern coast. The sonar images show what look to be man-made structures on the seabed. Could these be what remain of the lost city, Atlantis?
Right now we are sailing to one of the points that we want to check. We call it the cathedral. It's really big. It's about 40 meters long. The main characteristic that we are looking for is if it's human-made or not.
This is the beginning of storm season for this area. Winds and foul weather pick up at the end of September and continue all through the winter. The divers have a very small window of opportunity to investigate before the weather and visibility get ugly.
We have a good news. Strong wind of yesterday blow dark water that came from the river. We'll have better visibility than we expected.
Approximately 12 meters below the surface, divers discover mysterious formations. Stones that seem to have been cut. Could these strange features point to something more than geology? Were these stones once part of the great walls that Plato described, hewn by Atlantean hands?
Man-made, yeah. It's too perfect to be casual. Yeah? Take a second look, yeah.
Escúchame, entonces yo no quiero utilizar la radio para decir estas cosas. Ha encontrado de unas vigas, una piedra redonda circular hecha por el hombre y todo el corte que tiene la estructura es humano.
Each diver surfaces with more details of what appears to be a unique discovery.
Había un ladrillo que no era cuadrado, terminaba, parecía que estaba trabajado también. Era una piedra, pero terminaba en pico, en cuña. Some places is like a wall, no? And there are like steps from the stair, very mysterious, no? Ay, ya tenemos, ¿no?
Increíble. Increíble.
The dive seems a success, but what have they really found? Before any conclusions can be drawn, the team's geologist, Juan Antonio, must review the footage. The discoveries off the coast may be linked to potential finds in Doñana, so the team continues their electrical imaging of what is below the mudflats. And the archaeologists conduct a careful survey of the surface in search of any cultural remains.
When we're looking for Atlantis, we're not just looking for the buildings of Atlantis. What we're looking for is the culture of Atlantis. We may not find all of the contours of the city. You could find a wall, you can find two walls, you can find rectangles. It still doesn't connect it directly with the ancient Near East and all of the great civilization from the Aegean through the Mediterranean. But every once in a while in archaeology, you come upon a smoking gun, something that connects all the dots for you.
And within the area defined by the circular patterns in the soil, Dr. Freund and his colleagues suddenly discovered two incredible artifacts.
He's a magnet, but look at that, look at that. Oh my gosh, people wait a whole career to find one of these little figurines, and to find two, and just magnificent. It's an ancient statuette, probably at least 2,000 years old. She is one of the most spectacular kinds of goddesses. Is she Astarte or Ishtar?
Astarte, or Ishtar, would be consistent with Bronze Age icons dating back up to 4,000 years. The team is excited not only because of the extraordinary beauty of the objects, but also because the content and style may represent a direct connection to the great civilizations of the ancient world, from the ancient Near East, through the Aegean, to the Mediterranean.
And those two small figurines can connect it. Because if we find the culture that fits into that context, then we found Atlantis.
Meanwhile, in port, Claudio, Juan Antonio, and the team of divers review the footage of what seem to be the ruins of man-made structures.
Yo veo aquí una superficie que parece el techo de un bloque. Imagínate que eso fuera una pared, un bloque hecho por el hombre. Parece un muro. Pero yo veo dentro de la piedra y veo líneas. Yo no veo un muro, yo veo un estrato diaclasado. Este diaclasado corresponde a esfuerzos regionales y seguro, vamos, yo apostaría que es geológico.
Yo no puedo afirmarlo con rotundidad, pero me cuesta creerlo, ¿no? Me cuesta verlo. Parece que pueda ser una formación natural que haya sido modificada. Parece que el hombre ha hecho algo ahí.
Que alguien aprovechara esta piedra que se la encuentra rota para construir un muro, puede ser.
Each analyzed stone brings with it new questions, and though they appear to have been formed geologically, they may still point to human use. Professor Freund is debriefed.
Cuando analizamos yacimientos del entorno de Doñana, vemos que muchas de estas rocas y de rocas de otro tipo cuadrangulares han sido reutilizadas en la construcción.
Could it be possible that the stones were transported and used by the ancients to build structures now buried under the Doñana mudflats? For 3 days now, the team has recorded advanced electrical and magnetic imaging across the geometric patterns isolated by the aerial photography.
Let's get Juan over here. Just let him look at this. This is the big circle.
Any structures underneath the soil will show up in the images as distinct breaks in a density and conductivity graph. If there are evenly spaced breaks in the soil densities that match the circular patterns on the surface, it will be strong evidence of subsurface structures matching the Atlantis description.
Okay, so here's the results of the electrical imaging across the large circle that's particularly reminiscent of Plato's description of Atlantis. The section's 160 meters long and 12 meters deep.
We have breaks here and breaks again at
60 meters.
60 meters.
The images show breaks in the subsurface densities consistent with the circular patterns seen from above.
In my view, the pattern of resistivity to electricity matches the pictures, matches the shape of the borders of the features.
We can explain the circles because they really are there. There is some kind of representation in the soil.
It's exciting news, and there's more. If a city was suddenly buried here, all the organic material associated with that civilization would be trapped. Over the centuries, this material would decompose and produce gas. And while retrieving core samples, the team has unsuspectingly tapped into something intriguing.
But isn't this the most exciting feature?
We have a mysterious methane layer that could indicate flora and fauna and human activity that were sealed in one single layer in a catastrophic event. Behind us sits the mudflats, where they identified with the satellite photography structures that seem to be buried inside the marsh.
Anticipating skepticism that the location of the legendary Atlantis has been discovered, Professor Richard Freund sums up the evidence so far.
Carbon-14 dating has told us that artifacts found inside of the marsh go from the period of 5,000 BCE all the way down to approximately 2000 BCE. We have a coring that tells us there was a deep water port that continued in to the center of this marsh. Electrical resistivity tomography identifies that there were actual signatures of walls that were located below the surface. And we have a mysterious methane layer that was sealed about 6 to 9 meters below the surface. It goes down deep. What is it? It must be about 5 meters? No.
Methane is a gas created by organic matter. A huge deposit of trapped methane is what one might find if the entire Atlantis civilization was suddenly buried. Though other factors may explain the source of the gas, its presence, coupled with the long-running history of tsunamis on this coast, make a strong case that a tsunami crashed onto this site and possibly buried a city. Flora, fauna, and people would all have been covered up in a catastrophic end. All the evidence is pushing researchers to excavate, but the groundwater is right below the surface. It would be difficult and costly to dig.
Going deeper than 7 meters is technically very complex and very expensive.
Yeah. It might take many years before anything here is unearthed. However, Spanish archaeologists recently made an important discovery inland. And when it's related to the evidence in Doñana, it may hold the key to the mystery of Atlantis.
This is Cancho Ruano, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. In the 1970s and 1980s, archaeologists discovered a series of different villages that preserved Tartessan culture. This Tartessan culture was so different than all the other culture around it. It was the culture of the South.
Dr. Freund believes Tartessan culture was Atlantean culture. But these 2,500-year-old ruins are 200 kilometers from the coast. Why?
Why did they come here? Some cataclysmic event on the coast pushed them out of their homes in the 9th century.
And yet the ruins here don't have any significant residential areas. There are temples, but few houses. There is a moat surrounding the site, but for what purpose?
There was no strategic purpose to it. It wasn't defensive, and it was done at great cost. It seems it served a symbolic purpose. It reminded the people of where they came from.
Professor Freund offers an intriguing solution to the Cancho Ruano enigma. He believes that this place is not the remains of a village, but a memorial to the lost kingdom of Atlantis. He calls it a ritual city and says that this site is actually a miniature replica of the Atlantean city.
So if we want to understand Tartessan culture, Tarshish and Atlantis of the South, we have to come here to the north to see what their culture really looked like. This is how they preserved their heritage. They built these ritual cities.
Concho is just one of several ritual cities found in this area. The people who built these sites were commemorating something. But how can these inland ruins be connected to an Atlantis on the coast?
Detectives say you follow the money. Archaeologists say you follow the stone. Slate is the key. This room is paved with slate. This slate room may have been the residence of the high priest for the entire memorial city. And slate is not indigenous to this area, but 250 kilometers to the south on the coast, it's very famous. The people would have brought slate all the way up to this Concho site.
According to Professor Freund, the slate in this temple connects the inland site with the coastal city of Atlantis. On its own, it's not enough to establish an indisputable link. But there's something else.
It was an altar.
A secret symbol that makes the connection stronger.
Another clue is the Holy of Holies. Located at the center of the entire city, just like Poseidon's temple that's mentioned in the writings of Plato, this was the place where the most sacred rituals would take place. Sacrificing of animals. Ritual objects were found here. Gold and silver, bronze.
According to Plato, the story of Atlantis came down to him from the Greek legislator Solon, who heard it from the priests of ancient Egypt. It seems the Egyptians had direct contact with the Atlanteans. Remarkably, in the most holy space of Concho there's a 3,500-year-old pharaonic symbol.
In this place, in the center, was found a symbol that goes back to the pharaoh Ahmose in the 16th century BCE. It's a symbol of holy metallurgy.
This symbol links this site to the metalworkers revered by the ancient pharaohs.
Metalworkers who made the holy implements that would be used in this sacred space.
In the historical record, there were 3 cities famous throughout the world for their mastery of metals: Tarshish, Tartessos, and Atlantis. This symbol could connect this place to them all, and perhaps is the ultimate proof that the 3 cities were one and the same.
Find the original altar.
And there's one more piece of evidence connecting Concho and Atlantis. It is the most remarkable artifact of all, an ancient carving that seems to preserve the very emblem of Atlantis.
It's a stone indicator of what they were memorializing, who they were. And what is it? It's a symbol of concentric circles, one inside the other. And they're found right at the threshold.
At the threshold of Concho and in many other ritual cities, large stone stelae were unearthed.
As you would come up to the city, you would see this standing stone in front of a warrior with his sword drawn. And here we have the concentric circles of the city that he's guarding. This signpost points to a city with one entrance in, and coming out. And in the center, the same thing that Plato is describing in Atlantis, central shrine of Poseidon. It's their memory of the past. And the symbols that we find on this is the way they remember Atlantis.
If this structure was built by refugees from Atlantis in memory of their sunken home, could this be a scale model of the real city still buried beneath the mud of southern Spain? In an inconspicuous patch of marshland may lie the secret that man has been seeking for more than 2,000 years. Here, scientists have employed advanced imaging technologies to detect the same patterns described by Plato, and the same designs that we find inscribed on a 2,500-year-old memorial. What seems to emerge is the guarded island city of circular canals with a central shrine and a waterway that leads to its heart. Perhaps it was here that our civilization was born. Perhaps this place was home to an ancient and advanced people, a culture of extraordinary achievement. Perhaps submerged beneath this ground is the place that we call Atlantis.